we look at the map and see how huge the Roman Empire was. And we recall that this Roman Empire was built substantially through military conquest. And so the Roman army must have been tremendously disciplined. And it was. And to get a little insight into that, we can read ancient Roman historians, and there's the historian Polybius, who tells us a little bit about the discipline that existed within the Roman army. And this quote here has to do with soldiers that fall asleep on watch. Let's say you're on watch at the edge of the army camp at 2 o'clock in the morning, and your job is to stay awake and make sure no one tries to sneak into the camp, but you're caught sleeping. All right? Well, the punishment is severe. And Polybius says that the punishment will be getting beaten to death. All right? That's a pretty harsh punishment for falling asleep on watch. Look at what Polybius says. The consequence of the extreme severity of this penalty, that is, getting beaten to death, and of the impossibility of avoiding it, if you get caught, then this will be the consequence. Well, the result of that is that the night watches of the Roman army are faultlessly kept. Not surprisingly, right? If you know, wow, if I fall asleep, I'm not just going to get in trouble, but I'm going to get beaten to death. That's a pretty strong incentive to stay awake on watch. Now, the principle at stake here is that in the army here, we've got to be able to trust one another. We have to be disciplined. And when I'm asleep, then I need to trust that the soldier on watch is really doing his job. And when that soldier who's on watch now is going to be asleep later and I'm going to be on watch, that soldier needs to trust me. We have to be able to trust each other. This is obviously an extreme, as Polybius says, and harsh punishment, but there's a reason for it. It does make certain sense. What about a soldier who steals from another soldier? Remember, in this army, we need to be able to trust one another. And theft obviously destroys trust. Well, Polybius says that the punishment of beating to death is also inflicted upon those who steal from the camp. So this is pretty harsh. All right. Now down below I have the word decimation. And that's related to the Latin word decem or decem, the Latin word for 10. And in this case, Polybius describes, let's say you have 50 soldiers who flee in battle. All right. Well, it's not in the Roman army's interest to kill 50 soldiers. What it will do is it will decimate them. In other words, it will take about 1/10. So you have 50 soldiers who were seen fleeing from battle. So we pull them together. We berate all of them. All right. We chastise all of them for fleeing. And then we take from among them 5. So 10%. And those 5 are killed. That's the concept of decimation. Our word decimation comes from that. So this is pretty harsh stuff. Now those are punishments. What about rewards? Because the Roman army doesn't just want to, it'll punish soldiers that need to be punished in order to maintain the discipline it takes to build and hold an empire. But it also wants to reward soldiers on the other side. So look at what Polybius says here. At the storming of a city, the first man to scale the wall is awarded a crown of gold. Of course, being the first one up is extremely dangerous, and you have a good chance of not making it, right? So, people want to live, so they have reasons not to be the first one up. But in order to give soldiers an incentive to be that first one up the wall, then if you do that, and obviously if you survive, then you're awarded a crown of gold. In the same way, those who have shielded and saved one of their fellow citizens or of the allies are honored with gifts from the consul, and this is the highest elected office in the republic. So not only do you get a reward, but you get a reward from a person of high status. And the men whose lives they have preserved present them with their own free will, with a crown. Present them of their own free will with a crown. And so the idea of this quote here is that the Roman army wants to give soldiers incentives to be brave, incentives to go above and beyond the call of duty. So we see on the one hand, punishments can be very harsh, rewards are also there, and the rewards might attract us to be especially brave, especially valorous. Well, these things get at certain values that the Romans have, certain moral values that the Romans have. A word we could use is virtues. What are the characteristics in the Roman world of a good person, right? What are the characteristics of a good soldier? Well, a good soldier doesn't fall asleep on watch. A good soldier does not steal from other soldiers. A good soldier does not flee in battle. A good soldier is brave and courageous. What are the characteristics of Romans in general? Let's go through some Roman virtues. One is Auctoritas. Our word authority is related to this. And this has to do with social standing. For the Romans, it's quite okay to be concerned about your social standing. And it's quite okay to want to have a high social standing. It's quite okay to think, I'm going to do certain things because I want people to perceive me in a certain way. I want high social standing. I want to convey in my being auctoritas, right? Another virtue is pietas. Our word piety comes from this, right? And pietas has to do, when we use the word piety in English, we use that usually in a religious context. A pious person is a religious person, a spiritual person. And for the Romans, that was there as well, a person who's devoted to the gods, but also devoted to family, devoted to country, devoted to the empire, right? So in Rome, we want to be pious, and pious people are admired. Piety, that is devotion to family, devotion to the empire, devotion to the gods, these things are admired. Industria, our word industry comes from this, and we refer to an industrious person, a hardworking person. So that's similar, and so that's easy for us to understand. A Roman virtue is hard work, and we admire people who are hardworking. Dignitas, our word dignity comes from this, has to do with a sense of self-worth, of legitimate pride. This could be related, I think, to Auctoritas. I have done certain things. I have legitimate pride in what I've done. I have a sense of dignitas. That is a sense of honor, right? It's a high sense of self-worth. And there's nothing wrong among Romans in having a high sense of self-worth, so long as that sense of self-worth is based on something. Someone could say, well, so what's your high sense of self-worth based on? Well, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And the person might respond and say, oh, okay, well, your high sense of self-worth is justified. Or perhaps they'll say, I don't think it's justified. And then we have an argument or something like that. Another virtue, gravitas, our word. We use this word actually in English. We can refer to a person of gravitas, a person who's deep, a person who, thinks about weighty, heavy things, right? There are grave people out there. So this is different from the idea of a grave that you bury people in, right? And it's different from gravity, what keeps us glued on earth. Although we can refer to a person of gravity or a person of gravitas. Earnestness in relation to important things. So a person of gravitas is focused on important things, gives his or her time to important, worthwhile, serious things. That's a person of gravitas. Iustitia, our word justice, is related to this. So, observance of good laws, giving people what they deserve, right? So justice, I think this is kind of Aristotle's idea, that justice is giving a person what he or she deserves, right? And so thinking well about that, what do people deserve? And then also observing good laws. So a person of justice observes good laws. This is a Roman virtue. Libertas, freedom of action, freedom from restraint, right? This doesn't mean doing anything you want, right? Because remember, pietas, devotion to family, devotion to the empire, devotion to the gods. So libertas doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. You do whatever you want, unless, as I have it down below, we're assuming that we're talking about a virtuous person. We're talking about a person who is striving to be a morally good, morally decent person of integrity. Well, that kind of person, when he or she is free, is not going to intentionally harm other people. It's not going to lie about other people. It's not going to intentionally tear other people down, right? So a person of great virtue, if free, then will just naturally do good things, right? But the idea here is freedom within the context of a virtuous life, okay? So, and that's obviously related to our English word liberty. Then we have securitas, so a Roman virtue, people who are concerned about the security of the state, the safety of the state. Obviously our word security comes from this. So we're concerned about order, we're concerned about the well-being of the state, and part of that has to do with security. Clementia, leniency, mercy. So there's Iustitia, what does a person deserve? And we might say, in a court of law, that a person deserves, by Roman standards, the death penalty. But then Clementia will come in. Well, this is what the person deserves, but we're going to lighten up a little bit. Or this person deserves to pay such and such fine. But we're going to bring to bear Clementia, and we're going to reduce the fine, something like that. So both of these virtues are at work, okay? And our word clemency comes from this Latin word. Now, so we have those virtues. One of the things that is a little foreign about ancient Rome is that there really wasn't anything wrong. And now here I'm speaking in very general terms. But there wasn't anything wrong with, as we might say in English, tooting your own horn. There wasn't anything wrong in ancient Rome about saying, look at me. There wasn't anything wrong in ancient Rome about wanting to be noticed, so long as you were noticed for doing good things, right? So Cicero, a well-known name from ancient Rome, he wrote to a Roman historian, and here's what he said: "You won't believe how much I want you to celebrate my name in your writings." I mean, imagine if, some famous person wrote this to an author today and it got out, the news got out. I think a lot of people would be taken aback by that. Cicero refers to this as a quite justifiable desire, in my opinion. You won't believe how much I want you to celebrate my name. And this is absolutely justified. My name should be celebrated, Cicero says. Now, a lot of people who've read Cicero's writing and, Cicero's Latin is excellent, and there's no question that Cicero was a person of excellence. And so objectively we say, well, yeah, Cicero's name should be celebrated. But what we tend not to like is when people say it of themselves. My name should be celebrated. But in ancient Rome, it's not really a problem so long as you can back up what you're saying. Cicero says, I have a burning desire for my achievements to be entrusted to your monumental works. I want to be remembered. All right? I want to be remembered. And I'm fully justified in wanting this because I have done great things. Well, Cicero actually did do a lot of impressive things. What makes us uncomfortable is that he's saying it himself, right? But that's okay in ancient Rome. I'm reading this book right now by this Roman historian Sallust, and he's, discussing, certain Romans and wars and things like that. Let's just look at a couple quotes. Sallust writes that exceptional deeds of the intellect are, like the soul, immortal. Exceptional deeds. So, in ancient Rome, I want to be the person who is chasing exceptional deeds, who is performing exceptional deeds. Because if I do things that are exceptional, then that will make me stand out. My social standing, my auctoritas, my sense of dignitas, right, will be evident. Right? I'll have high social standing because I have done exceptional things. That's perfectly okay to talk that way. Each man praised his own courageous deeds to the sky. This is after a battle where the soldiers get together. And this is, actually you hear combat veterans say this. After a battle, they will get together and sometimes talk about what happened. But I don't think in this way, where each soldier is praising his own courageous deeds. Sallust doesn't say that the soldiers are complimenting one another, right? They're praising their own courageous deeds. I think that's going to strike a lot of Americans in the early 21st century as a little strange. Sallust writes the prowess, that is, ability in fighting, ability in war, right? Prowess, glory, and other qualities are to be coveted by good men, right? To covet something, to really want something, to strongly desire something, right? I want glory, right? I want glory. Well, that doesn't sound right to a lot of folks in the early 21st century, but in Rome, it was okay. And then a classic example comes from a lengthy inscription from ancient Rome, the achievements of the divine Augustus, right? And Caesar Augustus, Octavian, who becomes Caesar Augustus, and this really long inscription that can be seen spells out his achievements, right? And so let's look at what it says in the introduction. A copy below of the deeds of the divine Augustus. There's this ancient, in the Roman Empire, the Caesars are considered gods, right? So the divine Augustus. So Augustus's deeds by which he subjected the whole wide earth. There's that ancient conception of the world. The entire world is what we know and have a sense of. Subjected the whole wide earth to the rule of the Roman people. And of the money which he spent for the state and Roman people inscribed on 2 bronze pillars which are set up in Rome. Okay, so these inscriptions are there. So, number 1, in my 19th year, on my own initiative, at my own expense, I raised an army with which I set free the state, referring to a civil war that takes place. 2, I drove the men who slaughtered my father into exile with a legal order, punishing their crime, and afterwards, when they waged war on the state, I conquered them in 2 battles. There's this thing we see a lot in the ancient world. I show my greatness by demonstrating what I've done in battle, by talking about what I've done in battle. 3, I often waged war, civil and foreign, on the earth and sea, in the whole wide world. And as victor, I spared all the citizens who sought pardon. There's that Clementia, right? There's Clementia. As for foreign nations, those which I was able to safely forgive, I preferred to preserve than to destroy. There's that Clementia again, right? So, no problem whatsoever in ancient Rome singing your own praises, right? So long as what you're saying is based on actual accomplishment. Now, looking ahead, what happens if you have a movement within the Roman Empire that grows very rapidly? And within this movement, you have some virtues that are the same. Industria, for example, right? Hard work. Well, the early Christians and the Romans, they'll agree that hard work is important. And the early Christian literature is full of admonitions, full of encouragement to work hard. So, Industria, yeah, okay, the Romans and the Christians share that in common. But what happens when a movement within the Roman Empire, we're talking about Christianity here, if it has some very different virtues? For example, the Christians will say, or their teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, will say, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." And what I encourage students to think about is, what would that have sounded like to a Roman soldier? Can you imagine a Roman soldier in present-day Israel overhearing somebody say, "Blessed are the meek"? All right? We're not talking about the soldiers who are scaling the walls and getting rewards, right? The meek. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And you can imagine the Roman soldiers saying, I don't think that's how you inherit the earth. I'm in the Roman army, and and I've read Polybius, and I know what it takes to accomplish what we've accomplished. And we've conquered the earth, right? And it wasn't through meekness. So what are the Christians talking about? All right? So this is very different. Or what about when Christianity's, central figure, Jesus of Nazareth, when he says, "The last will be first and the first will be last." In other words, the big shots, the emperor, they'll be at the end of the line. And the poor and the beggars, they'll be at the front of the line. When Jesus of Nazareth says that kind of thing, and a movement that grows up around his teachings, what will the Romans make of this? And this is where we're going. We're going to compare some Christian and Roman virtues. And where we're going is working on getting some insight into why Christianity was persecuted within the Roman Empire. Because at times and places in the Roman Empire, not consistently and not everywhere, but in some times and some places, Christianity was persecuted, sometimes pretty severely. And the question is why? And one of the answers, just to kind of get started, is that from the Roman point of view, the Christians had some very strange ideas. These are two of them. Blessed are the meek, because the meek will inherit the earth. And you can imagine the Roman soldiers saying, that doesn't make sense. Or you've got, Caesar Augustus reporting all of his deeds, right? I mean, look at me, I'm awesome. Look at my Auctoritas, my Dignitas, my social standing, my accomplishments. Cicero saying, I want glory, I want to be remembered. And then the central figure at the heart of this movement that grows in the Roman Empire, he says something very different. He says, those who are first now will be last later, and those who are last now will be first later. Well, these are very, very, very different virtues. And we're going to see how they kind of clash a little bit. This discussion reminds me a little bit of a discussion we had some time back comparing Sargon the Great and Moses, right? Sargon was very much, as we saw, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, and that makes me great. Moses, on the other hand, all kinds of problems. He has a speech impediment. He seems not to be able to control his own people. But one of the weird things we noticed was that although Sargon the Great is remembered as a historical figure, Sargon the Great, his influence doesn't really touch us a whole lot in the 21st century. Moses, on the other hand, not seemingly so impressive as a leader when we, read the literature that speaks of him, the ancient Hebrew literature that speaks of him. And yet the influence of Moses is global. Well, I think it's the same thing with Christianity. Because it's interesting that the Roman Empire was huge, just huge and such an impressive achievement, that this empire was built and that it held together for as long as it did. But it's interesting that this movement that grew up within the Roman Empire, Christianity, became bigger and more enduring and more influential. And one of the reasons I say that is because a lot of the Roman literature that we have survived in Christian monasteries after the Roman Empire comes unglued. A lot of those books from ancient Rome survive in Christian institutions, in Christian monasteries. So it's interesting, this religion that grows up in the Roman Empire, which values meekness, which says don't seek glory, right? Which says that the last will be first, and the first in this world will be last. That movement ends up becoming a much greater influence than the Roman Empire. It's a very interesting thing, and so we'll continue on that theme.